Thank you so much, Alicia, for coming to this podcast recording. Really excited, especially because it's about executive leadership when it comes to females and women. And I thought this would be exciting because a lot of our audience is actually basically women in STEM and eventually want to become a leader. The first question I usually like to ask people is can you provide a short introduction of yourself?
Yeah, my name is Alicia Jabbar. I am an executive leadership coach, and I also bring groups of women who work in technology together to talk about what's present in their careers and how to actually increase their leadership capacity in where they live and work. I have had a long, winding career that has been part circumstance and part interest. I started out in the financial services industry, more on like a customer service rep. And as part of that role, I learned that I really like spreadsheets and data. It was just something that I happened to stumble upon. And then I went a route into more data analytics, and I worked in retail, in supply chain analytics for Williams-Sonoma corporate, actually. And that was in like the 2009, 2010 recession. And I realized pretty early on, as part of that role, that jobs aren't permanent. You can love your job, but it will not necessarily love you back, which was a very important lesson. So I took a brief break during that time, and I actually lived and worked on an organic vegetable farm where I learned a lot about business and entrepreneurship, which continues to serve me to this day. And then at the end of that time, the economy was still really bad, and I took the only job that I could find, literally. I thought I was going to work for a Spanish language radio station. That's what I thought I was applying for, but it was actually an early stage digital media advertising company. When that industry was still like kind of blossoming and new. And that led me into a career in digital advertising where I built product and partnerships teams for about 5 years before landing here. We had an acquisition exit to Oracle.
Amazing. Yeah, I saw your profile and I was like, farming, that is definitely different. And I was curious, if that was something you were willing to do. Was that something that would you like to work on our farm, or was it something you sought for at that time, I guess?
Yeah, it's interesting. It was an idea that came up over a girls' weekend. Just the idea of slower pace of life. I had been living in San Francisco for many years. I was just craving like a different type of life. And I had actually my partner at the time had bought me a CSA box, which is community supported agriculture, where you get deliveries of vegetables to your door. And as part of being a member of that CSA, we got invited out to the farm. And I can kind of recall that days that we spent on the farm are learning about just really different, really random things. But clearly the farmer who ran this farm was a very astute business person, and how he diversified and did a bunch of different things. I just thought, I love being out there. What would it be like to spend more time kind of in this place? And I was brainstorming with some girlfriends over a girls' weekend and just kind of decided to go for it.
That's so cool. I feel like a lot of people, especially during the Great Resignation, said I'm going to go start my own farm, but you did it way before them. So I guess you also mentioned that you had a lot of business lessons that you learned there. What were some of those business lessons?
Yeah, I'll give a little anecdote. I actually, maybe midway through my career, did an entire interview for a position that I got. I ended up not taking it, but just on the business lessons of farming. So if you're out there thinking about interviewing and you don't have applicable skills, you can always use story and anecdote from other parts of your life and what it taught you, because this landed me a job that I ultimately did not take. Things that I still use today in my own entrepreneurship of running my own business is farmers have a pretty low margin business, which is not true of my business, but they seem to find the right balance between consistent work and always having some form of experimentation. So if you talk to a farmer, it's this is my business, and this year I'm playing with this, or in this season I'm playing with this. So there's always some level of experimentation that they're infusing in their business, despite how much natural risk there is to the business of farming, and how little wiggle room they have. I learned about differentiation I remember one time, this is kind of weird, but we sold chard as an example, which is a vegetable. And I thought, oh, all the vegetables need to look really, really pretty. This other farm stand, cut off their stems. So I started doing that one day, naturally. It's like, let's pretty up our vegetables before we go to market. And the farmers were like, that's time. It was so clear, like, that is not what we are about. I do not want you to do that. I couldn't believe how much there was a reason behind every single thing they did and how thoughtful and thorough every aspect of their business model was. And I think about that all the time.
That's so interesting. I feel like farming is one of the industries I have absolutely no clue. I just know the farmers market. I don't know what goes on behind the scenes after that. Before that. But wow, that's really interesting because it really teaches you to be lean, right? On the way you spend your time and money.
Yeah. They also are huge stewards of history.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of the story of how they're here and the story of why they've made these decisions and all the other ways they've done things. And yeah, they are remarkable in, how they hold information, how they think about their customers.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And speaking of that, I guess like if you had all the time in the world, what would you be doing? Would you be back on that farm or would you be still doing what you're doing or something else maybe?
I still sometimes fantasize about running a farm. It's not like close up, but maybe retiring on like a piece of land. I think if I had all the time in the world, I would be definitely spending more time outside. It's my recharge place. I'm very active outdoors. And a part of my business that I do regularly is writing. I write a lot of thought leadership on women in tech, but I think it would be something along the lines of full-time writing. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't know what that looks like, but it is in every aspect of my career. I've always loved the aspect of writing.
So is it mostly articles on LinkedIn or somewhere else?
I keep all of my own articles on my own website.
Oh, nice.
I have opinions about that, but I do post things to LinkedIn. And there's an archive on my website that you can search by whatever's present for you, and you can find whatever I've written on that topic, which is kind of nice.
Mm-hmm. And is maybe a book down the line?
Potentially. A lot of what I do with women in technology is help them uncover what leadership their way looks like. And, maybe there would be some type of interview series where I'm actually interviewing more senior women about that journey for themselves and doing kind of anecdotes along the lessons that I've curated over, 8 years of doing this.
Okay, well, speaking of women of leadership, can you explain to me what that really means to you? Is it like C-suite, or is that managers, or basically the leader in every person, regardless what level you are?
Yeah, my definition of leadership is that everybody's a leader. And so there are, leadership is not a title that somebody gives to you and says, congratulations, Christine, you're now a leader. It is a designation that you see in yourself and step into and how you approach your world and how you approach your career. A lot of what I do with women applies to women earlier in their career, all the way up to the C-suite. I on a one-on-one basis, coach a lot of women who are, single female of an executive team as an example.
Yeah, I think that's probably a misconception when it comes to like, oh, here's an executive leadership coach. You're probably only working with C-suite or people that are trying to be there, but you're working with like, what is the age group that you actually work with, or maybe even stage of life?
It really depends. I think a better way of talking about the women that I work with. So there's two aspects of my business, one-on-one coaching and the group programs. In the one-on-one business, who I support or who I coach are people who sit on the outside of what is known, valued, or understood in the places they live and work. So for example, I am coaching a woman who is earlier on in her career, but she is hired to be the first UX person that her organization has hired. So she is speaking a language and bringing a skill and a modality that her organization had an idea of. And now she's charged with actually executing it and influencing the broad organization. She's not senior in her career necessarily, but she is very senior in this role and this function compared to anybody else. In the group programs, I've historically run blended groups. I'm running a group in an organization right now. The youngest person is maybe 6 years out of college, maybe even a little earlier. And I've got somebody who is, one step from the executive suite, all in the same group together.
Amazing. And I think you mentioned that before this, it was like a company that exited, right? So what made you decide to I want to be an executive leadership coach, or I want to be in this space?
Yeah, I will say, a lot of my experience as a female leader in a technology organization was feeling often like the only of. I've had numerous experiences where that has been my experience. But I did have an executive coach as part of my career. And I was in a group program with high-performing leaders within my company. So that was my first foray into coaching. And then the more prominent seed was, as part of that organization, I moved back to the Bay Area to stand up our large technology partnerships with the big companies that you can imagine are based in Silicon Valley. And because I'm an outdoors person, I didn't have a huge outdoor community when I moved back to the Bay, although I had lived there, that wasn't my community. And so I was going on these trips with an organization called Trail Mavens, which was outdoor adventures for urban women. And on the first trip I ever went in, I was really surprised by the depth of conversation created by strangers. I like deep conversation. And so one day driving back from a hike, I asked the woman who had started this organization, how do you do that? Is that a learned skill? And she had been trained as a coach. And that was a seed that was like, I want that skill. And originally when I went to coaches training, I thought it would just make me a better manager. It was like, if I can create this depth of connection with my employees, I'm going to really nail the management thing. And then, the organization was changing. We had been acquired. I was pitching a new product role to stand up a new section of the business. And at some point I just had this, I could do that. I know I can build this team and lead this role, but it wasn't as resonant as the idea of actually supporting other female leaders. So I made the change.
That's so cool. So I guess could you tell me a little bit about what were the ways that they were coaching to be able to lead those conversations, or if you're even adopting any of those techniques now?
I do not adopt any of the techniques that I actually learned from my first executive coach or that program. And I'll tell you a little bit about why. There is a popular tool used in corporate environments called the Leadership Circle 360. Leadership Circle Profile 360, and there's different versions of it depending on your level, but on each of these indicators they look at how creative you are as a leader and how reactive you are as a leader, and good leadership is generally more creative. And oddly, since this tool has become increasingly popular, the people who created it have come out and said women, generally speaking, rank way more creative as leaders than any men do. So on what they consider good leaders, women tend to dominate the metrics, although that doesn't necessarily translate to our experience in the workplaces. But part of that is they rank, they tell you scored in the 98th percentile of people who have ever taken this assessment. So you're in a comparison to people within your organization, it can be in your function, and ever. And I scored 98th percent in courageous authenticity, which ended up in my initial experience with a coach being something to work on. You need to work on this courageous authenticity because you're way off the charts. It was almost like something you needed to improve. And only later did I realize that's actually the thing that makes me really great at this current job. And I went back and had a conversation with my coach years later and said, why didn't we ever talk about how to leverage this strength? Instead of something that you kind of had to shave away. And it was a moment for me where it was like, this is not working. So it was a big light bulb moment for me. But in terms of developing that depth that I really like, I mean, the number one skill is open-ended questions.
All right. So I'm hearing a lot of one-on-one and group workshops or group programs. What exactly have you been doing as a coach? I also did see that you're a facilitator at Stanford, pretty much doing something similar, interpersonal dynamics. Is that something similar to what you're coaching on?
Yeah, so there's going to be a theme here. And when we get to advice for people listening in, I really do well with variety. I get energized by variety. I'm not the type of person who wants to do the same thing day in and day out, which can have some limitations in corporate environments. For a while I was building a partnership, and then once that was through beta product, I would hire a team to run that partnership, and then I would go on. And then at some point in a lot of traditional career paths, variety is not that celebrated. So what I've built in my own business is a business that actually allows for a lot of variety. So the interpersonal dynamics course that I facilitate at Stanford it's their top rated course in their MBA program through the Global School of Business. And it is a specific modality of leveraging feedback as a mechanism for building interpersonal dynamics across differences. So it is when you do X, I feel Y. That's interesting. That wasn't my intent. My intent was Z. You're kind of like navigating the way our brains make assumptions and the way we hold bias and how that informs interpersonal dynamics. So that is the Stanford work. On a one-on-one basis, I typically work with people in 6-month increments, sometimes with assessments, which can be very traditionally the way that executive coaches work. Again, to uncover blind spots and help leaders see how what they're attempting to do is actually translating to, so they can actually make those things closer together. They can actually deliver what they intend to deliver and how they lead. And then in the group programs, the thing that sets the group programs apart that I run for women is one of the big things I saw early on in working with women was there are traditionally what is valued within organizations, and some of what is valued is in direct contradiction to the conditioning that women receive. And all of the, within their families, within their schools, within their organizations, through pop culture, all of these things. So we're told to do one thing, but it's directly in contradiction to literally years worth of implicit and explicit messaging. So how do women want to be with that disconnect? There's not a right or a wrong way, but just critical thinking about those differences. Or we totally self-abandon ourselves because there's only one thing modeled in higher ranks of organizations. And at some point I was seeing women say, okay, I've sacrificed. I can't sacrifice anymore, and I'm never going to become this thing. So then what? And so my programs hold both of those realities and actually bring them into discussion for women to work through.
That's actually leading to one of my questions that I have here. But the first question I'll ask is that, in your own words, how do you think women are raised versus what do you think corporations want?
Yeah, this is, I will say when I run programs, I am not prescriptive about this, and I'll give you some examples because everybody's experience is different. And, there's a challenge when we speak so generally about women and intersectionality and how people are raised. So wide swath generalization. But one big thing is women are taught to be like nice and to keep the peace. When we're young girls, generally speaking, oh, you're so nice. I have a 2-year-old son. I watch this happen even at kids his age. It's like the ways that we enforce girls' behavior versus boys' behaviors is around like niceness versus like strength and leadership. I mean, it happens so young. And a lot of women do nice really well. We're known as great collaborators. This serves us in our career. It is not like a blanket, you must remove kind of this conditioning. But imagine somebody whose entire conditioning is raised to be nice, and then they have to make a decision in a high level between opposing views. That conditioning, like a woman's difficulty to do that, is often tied back to that conditioning. They're entering into territory that years of their experience has been to not enter that territory. Similarly, like put others first. A woman's role is to serve those around her. And again, this is not necessarily always super explicit, but it's in a lot of things that we're exposed to. It can create this dichotomy when you think about a woman in leadership between tension of a manager who wants you to come up with an initiative and the ambiguous territory of not understanding what would serve this leader. Like, you haven't gotten enough context. There's a lot of unknown, and you're up against but I don't know what to deliver because I don't know what this person wants. And it's like, your job is to figure out what they want. And so there's a tension that emerges a lot in a lot of these situations.
Yeah, I can totally see how I was raised, like, especially with a lot of Asian culture, like conformity is everything. And in some cases, I actually have spoken to some of my friends on this, is that a lot of introverts, maybe a lot of leaders in Asia are not technically classified as the typical leaders in the Western culture. And a lot of times, like, even though they may be a leader in their industry or in their field, as a leader in a company or management, they are probably not the typical stereotype of what a leader would be. So not even just male or female, it could also be about like the cultures that you're in as well.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that all the time from my GSB students. It's super common in the women who come into the groups that I run. And it's not to say there's a right or wrong, but it's like, in what ways is this serving you? You wouldn't do it if it didn't serve a purpose, because we're smart, brilliant human beings. And in what ways do you want to play with an expanded range of your leadership in service of something that you're really wanting? And then on the other side of that, it's like, how can you really honor what is your reality and the way that you want to lead, and be creative with bringing that into organizations that, might not value that, or
I guess like my follow-up question that I was thinking of while we were having this conversation was that, so a lot of women, they're kind of raised to be like a mother, a wife, have a family, be caregiver, exactly what you were saying. So that also provides a lot of, hardships to be able to become that ruthless leader that everyone wants, to be able to like cut costs and fire people or something like that. But like, what do you think we can do, despite like the way the system is like right now, to be able to do our best in what we're doing right now, to become a leader in the way society is at this time?
Yeah, it's interesting. Even in your question, Christine, there is this notion of like, in order to fire somebody, you have to be ruthless. And sometimes like letting someone go is actually, it's not always ruthless. But the idea of kind of like putting somebody out there and cutting ties feels ruthless to most women. And that's based on how we're raised. And sometimes it's like the organization is moving in a direction that no longer needs this type of talent. There's a mechanical way that some of these things can also be true without the way we attach the story to it. One of the exercises that we do in our program is have women look at their life. And, what have been the key moments and the bends in the river. And, there's an exercise where we have women look at marquee moments. And then, we put that aside. And then later on, we're looking at conditioning and what they've been told makes a good woman, a good employee, a good whatever. And then we have them look at the two. And in every single one of those marquee moments, they have almost always been going against the way they were conditioned. So it's like, your most prominent moments in your life do not uphold or collude with the conditioning that has been most applicable for you. And so women are at a decision point of, again, it's not always break this conditioning or do differently, but in service of getting women kind of refocused on dreaming, which I would say is also conditioned out of us. In what ways do you want to bend this in service of what you're wanting? And so you can just ask yourself like a set of prompts. What do you think makes a good employee? What is a successful career? What's a woman's value in society? And then, okay, if that's what you're holding, how is that impacting how you show up at work? And how might you want to play with bending that in different contexts?
So it kind of sounds like a lot of the work you're doing is actually mostly mentality work, like maybe the way that changing or shifting the mentality of how people approach work in leadership space. So does that sound accurate to you, or do you actually do other exercises or activities that don't do just the mentality?
Yeah, I do. contextually based experiential design. So women, we give an experience, and we look at that experience through a specific context, often leadership. And then it's like, what did that learn and how do you want to apply it? But my programs are 3 parts: the unwind from conditioning, and then restoring what I call your inherent nature, the things that you value most, the things that energize you, really having women declare who they want to be as leaders in the world and in their organizations. How does she operate? What's important to her? What does she put forward? And then in the 3rd module, which is increase your ability to do that by supporting each other in small and big ways. So it's kind of 3 parts. But it's a lot of, you kind of got to get rid of the old, rediscover what's kind of underneath that or what's more inherent to you, and then how do you actually live into that?
Are there any techniques you would recommend for, at least, like, I guess this could go into advice for young women, or I don't know how young you're talking about, like if you even mean by like toddler age, because it seems like that's probably the most impressionable age around. So, but like, what would you be saying is like the best advice or some of the best advice for young women to be able to lead eventually, or lead right now?
I'll speak to the demographic of like post-college graduate entering into technology as the baseline. Yes to toddlers, and that's not my focus. Somebody should focus on that. Parenting advice. One of the things that I would say is one of the easiest concepts that we talk about in our programs that really tend to shift women's perspective is there are kind of 2 sides of leadership. There is what you are doing and who you are being. And when we think about career pathing, we really focus on the doing as an example. Well, I did this and then I have to do this and then that leads to this. It's like you can kind of see the natural progression of like talent or function. The trick with that is, I may be on the far extreme end of this, but I see this a lot, is you don't know what you want until you get started. And so I meet a lot of women who are like, well, I started here and I don't want to keep going up in this function. I don't want to keep being a product manager. Turns out engineering was like fun to learn in college, but I don't actually want to be an engineer in these contexts. So when you look at the being side of behind the doing, you're actually able to start seeing a broader set of options for you. Like for me in my own career, it's like, what does being a product person have to do with a salesperson, have to do with being a coach? It's like so non-linear. And what I've learned is my ability to listen makes me able to execute at a really high caliber as a product person, because product is actually about user listening, depending on where you work. It makes me a good salesperson because partnerships are built on the ability to listen and understand who you're selling to. And in coaching, it's the baseline skill of any coach. So really asking yourself who you are when you're doing something as much as how the thing that you're actually doing. It's the difference between saying, I shipped a product, which is like the do, versus I was able to negotiate a really sticky situation between these 2 groups of people. And, it's like there is a way you do that is unique to you, and tracking that and kind of following that over time will guide you on your career. That's one thing that comes to mind.
Are you familiar with what Ikigai is?
Mm-mm.
So it's like a Japanese concept.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I actually, like, every time someone goes to me and asks me, like, I don't know what I want to do. And I'm like, what should I do? And the first thing they think of, like, I'm good with numbers, so I should be an accountant. And then I always provide, like, maybe look at Ikigai, because it kind of makes you step back a little bit. Like, maybe you like numbers, but like, why do you like numbers? And go a little bit more broad picture, because then that way, exactly what you said, like a lot of career paths are probably not going to be linear. You're probably not going to be a mathematician and an accountant and doing a little bit more numbers stuff. You're probably going to do things that are a little bit more like conceptually, like maybe you like listening, maybe you like leading, maybe you like teaching or collaborating. Like there's just a lot of bigger picture concepts and activities that you can pretty much do in a lot of other roles. It's just maybe the slightly different tweak. But that was like probably the first thing that came to mind when you mentioned like, okay, what is like what you're going to be being or doing, as opposed to like these tiny little things, that the tiny details of it.
Yeah, and then it allows you to enroll other people. Like, here's what I know I like to do. Here are the types of problems I like to solve. It's like a level deeper than just functionally what you've done. And then you can say, what other things like need these skills? Or it's just a different way of thinking about it.
So I guess from all of this, from your career path, from helping out other women in their career path, like what would you say is some advice that you give to anyone that's listening? It could be a male or female, someone in tech or not in tech, or just in general, someone who wants to eventually become a leader or be a better leader than they are today.
Yeah, we're kind of in this environment right now where there's always more to learn, always more skills to acquire. We're seeing this a lot. Women are getting higher education at way higher rates than men. There's this idea of like, I'm going to get the skill, I'm going to up level myself. And I do not want to discount that. A lot of that is very valuable. And so this is not to say that that is not a good move. But one of the things, piece of advice that I would give is this is baseline, be recording what you're actually, like what's working and what you're doing. This is contradictory for the field that I work in, but we're very like improvement oriented and like achievement oriented and what's next and what is there next to learn. And I would say over the last 3 years in my work, it's like, what's working? What did you actually deliver? What skills do you have? Our brains are now getting wired to only focus on the improvement piece. It's like, it's going to be way easier to capitalize on what's working than it is to kind of make these huge changes. So counterbalance and take a real live inventory of the things that are working or the skills that you do have, and actually be in conversation with other people about that. It's like, we used to run a negotiation workshop where it was like, start negotiating today. Don't let your first negotiation be your job. Start with negotiating what you're having for dinner, negotiating where you're going on vacation. Just like step into the role of the negotiator in smaller instances before you get to a place where it's like table stakes are high and, negotiating a salary.
Amazing. And so actually now we're going to go into like the section where it's very focused on women and their careers. So I guess like throughout this entire time, like what are some obstacles you face as a woman in your career?
Me personally, Christine?
Yeah.
Ooh. Some big lessons that I learned were when I moved back to the Bay Area to set up these large partnerships. So taking a big step back, part of what my company did was tie online advertising to offline data. And we were developing a set of measurement ad products that were focused on, very heavy data analytics for Facebook before their valuation. And when Facebook had a really big valuation that was partly driven by our product with them, it was like, every company's going to want this. You're moving to San Francisco. We're going to blow this out of the water. And at that time, the boss that hired me into the San Francisco office and my business development partner, my boss quit and my business development partner went out on maternity leave. So I had never been in a partnership role. I was like transitioning from like pure product into partnership. I had no idea what I was doing. I was reporting into an executive. It was a nightmare. But a very important lesson that I learned was I used to measure my success as being able to hit every milestone with every client. It's like, I remember one day I went into the executive's office and I had like 98 items that I needed to do for the quarter. And it was like, he was like, good luck. You're never going to do all these. And I walked out of that meeting thinking, oh yeah, I am. I am going to do all 98 of these. And I did. And he was like, the expectation should never be that you should do every single thing that's available to you. Your role as a leader is actually to discern what's most important. So while like you've hit all these milestones, like you missed the point of the assignment kind of. And I remember having this moment of being like, oh my gosh, I totally missed the point of the assignment.
Mm.
That was like a huge lesson. It was like an opportunity to actually step into determining how I was going to prioritize, setting expectations about how I was going to prioritize, aligning all of the internal teams around, different priorities instead of just saying we got to all get it done. It was a huge shift. And if you think about, CEOs, they are not doing everything available to them.
Yep.
It's like there are tons of opportunities to do these macro things up here.
Mm.
I would say another lesson that I learned is, as a result of just having so much to do, it was tough to be, again, women are relationship people. Our job is to be nice. And I had worked something out with that executive where he would manage the relationship and I would do the work. It did not work out. One, the perception was that I wasn't a relationship person, which is not true at all. I'm a very partnership-driven person, but I really opened up the gates of not being myself, saying yes to an agreement that didn't serve me, getting hit with a reputation of not being a relationship person, which is hard as business and then doubly hard as a woman. And yeah, I would rethink that. Business is relationships. Other instances. There was a point where there were kind of 3 senior men, and each of them kind of had 2 women who then managed their entire orgs. And we were all kind of in the partnerships org. And it was just interesting to be part of conversations with this woman where it's like, we see so clearly that there is literally a ceiling of 3 men, and everything below those 3 men is being managed by like teams of 2 women. And I would say that was a challenge in that it was so clear to us and so not clear to the people above us. And how do you like navigate and hold yourself in that? But I think like the biggest kind of macro lesson in all these experiences is, and why specifically I bring groups of women together, is the system is designed to make it think that it's you. That you are the reason you are not getting promoted, or there is something within you that is keeping you from that level. And when I bring groups of women together, and it's like, it's not us. It's like when we stop believing that, it's 100% our responsibility or it's 100% our thing, the creativity just emerges in a brand new way for women to step more into their leadership capacity.
That actually leads to one of the questions that I had, which was, what can men do to support women to be able to be at least empowered to be in those positions?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I will say, every time we bring a group of women together, they say, is this really our job? Like, obviously the system's broken. And yes, the system is broken. And the thing that I say to women in those situations is like, we've been waiting for people in power to change for a very long period of time. I am not to say that does not need to happen. I 100% think it does. And what's in your control and what you can do in the interim. And some of that is like not colluding as much with the people in power in ways that end up being sacrificial to you and kind of what you want to be in your work and in your career. But what men can do is acknowledge that this is actually a thing and check their own bias around the expectations they have for women. And I mean, depending on who you're talking to, tons of structural changes, pay transparency. I mean, you've had guests on your podcast to talk about this. There's a lot that men in power can do.
On the flip side, what do you think women could do to have men a little bit more aware of it, without being saying like straight up like, okay, you need to be a little bit more aware, or like do this random training that this company provided? What do you think that woman could do in that situation to be able to, I guess, spread awareness?
I would say ask a second question. What I mean by that is, I had a woman in a group recently who, there's like this old thing like, am I intimidating or are you intimidated? It's like when you are on the receiving end of something that doesn't feel right to you or sparks that sense of like, wait, that's not what I'm doing, or that's not me, or, you know, a projection basically on you, ask another question. So a concrete example of that is, somebody's questioning your work a lot. And you're in this pattern of just like answering their questions, right? Like it's so clear to you, you're kind of thinking like, why are they asking these questions? Instead of just like continuing to do that dance, up level or pause the conversation and say, I hear that you're asking a lot of questions. Let's take it away from the details. Is there a bigger concern that you're having about this project, this work, this initiative? And often it'll catch them off guard. They'll realize like their questions are actually, they don't even know why they're asking the questions. They're just in the conditioning of questioning women. That would be like a small example.
I never thought about that, actually. That's definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
Is it because
like, or with a manager, I'm noticing you want a lot of details around this project. That's like a skill called articulating what's going on. So you're actually giving voice to something that's not like, you're questioning the hell out of me. It's like, I see you asking really detailed questions. What's the bigger concern here?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times they won't actually be able to identify a bigger concern.
Okay.
Or let me think about that and I'll come back to you. But like just not continuing on in the, I call it a dance between two people, a dance that actually doesn't feel like there's any real reason. We've all had that experience of like, what is going on here?
Mm-hmm.
And kind of disrupting that pattern.
Do you think that's conditioned because maybe they have doubts on women on delivering whatever they're asking to do?
Yeah, and they have their own conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that sometimes men see their role as being like authority over women. And it might not even be necessary. It's just that is what they're conditioned to do.
Mm-hmm. So I guess like moving forward, if any listeners or viewers of this podcast right now are interested in like maybe those coaching programs that you have or those group programs, like how could they reach to you?
Yeah, you can find out information on my website, which is aliciajabbar.com. I will send that to you. I am in a transition phase. So by the time this airs, I am going to be running I do monthly or every other monthly sessions on women in leadership that are just live and you can come to them. It's actually free of charge. Nice. I'm going to be doing one on boundaries. Part of the reason for that is I see leaders as being responsible for their worlds. When I talk to women in leadership, it is not the entire world. It is the world in front of you. And in order to be responsible for your world, you have to understand what's yours and what's not yours. So we're going to be jumping into that and from an experiential standpoint, so women can get better able to discern what's theirs and what's not theirs. And then I'm going to be doing a ritual at the end of the year in December and January about closing out the year and establishing a new year, and doing that in a leadership focused way. That's a little bit different than traditional goal setting.
Nice. And actually, out of curiosity, do you limit these programs, coaching, workshops to just women, or do you even have like men coming in as well?
When I run programs to the public, which I do, I keep it to just women or people who identify as women, or who experience the world through the lens of a woman in present day. In corporate, I will do it for mixed audiences, and it's just a lot of, it's just different to facilitate. But obviously when I'm working within an ERG or a women's organization, a lot of allies who do not identify as women join our programs.
Yeah. So I guess that probably answers my question that I was going to ask, which is like, what is on the horizon for you in 2023? Would it be these initiatives and just make sure that they're successful, or do you have even something a little bit further down the line?
I do have something further down the line. I just closed a business that I co-run for the last 5 years. It was called Inside Out Incubator. We closed that for a variety of reasons. I had a business partnership in that. And so I am in the imagining what's next phase. We had a program called the Rebellious Leader. which was a 3-month intensive program that had been running for about 3 years. We have hundreds of alumni to that program. I am transitioning that to be slightly more embodied, meaning using women's entire instrument besides just our logic, which is what we tend to lead with. So redesigning it to include some more embodiment and other knowledge sources, and with stronger accountability and celebration groups and how women come together. And the other big tweak is more practice-based. So you can gain a skill, but how you practice it is actually what increases your capacity. So it's going to be some fundamental tweaks to that program, and I'm probably going to launch that in February.
Exciting. And so all that information will be on your website?
It will.
Okay. So for anyone listening or watching, definitely check out the show notes for that. And so moving forward, like, do you have social media? Is it mostly your LinkedIn that you go by right now?
I do go by my LinkedIn. I post everything that's happening on that page, and it's where I connect with kind of everybody working in this industry and the people who most frequently find me and work with me.
Amazing. And then lastly, what can we do to support you?
My gosh, what can you do to support me? Spread the word, and be an advocate for why women's leadership is its own unique thing. Believing in that and actually touching on the piece of like, our conditioning does impact how we lead in the world. And that's worth taking a look at. That's kind of the fundamental thing that's different. But I think if more women could see that, we'd be better able to make changes for ourselves.
Awesome. So I really hope that from anyone listening to this podcast, that like that is probably the message to take away. So do you have any other messages that you want the listener to take away, or that's the one?
Any other messages I want the listener to take away? It's not you necessarily. The system is playing a huge part. And the earlier on in your career that you're clear about that aspect of what's yours and what's systemic, the more creative, the more access you'll have to your own creativity and how you lead and how you navigate your career.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Really excited to share your website and for a lot more to come in later 2022 and also 2023.
Thank you so much, Christine. I really appreciate you having me.
Thank you.